Hi everybody. As the video title suggests, I'm here to talk about Hercule Poirot's Christmas. But before I do, I'd like to go back into my childhood and share with you all how I became a fan of the character of Hercule Poirot in general, and of this series in particular. Agatha Christie's Poirot is a show that I have been watching my entire life. In all honesty, I don't remember the first time I sat down and watched an episode. What I do remember is back in the first or second grade, we were all asked to draw a picture of what we did the evening before or maybe over the past weekend, and I drew my best rendition of David Suchet as Poirot. I even gave him an incongruous magnifying glass as a visual cue for my teacher to understand that this was supposed to be a detective. I believe there was also a brief description underneath the drawing, or at the very least a caption, and I don't even want to imagine how I attempted to spell the name of Poirot. I'm sure not a single other person in my class had any idea what I was talking about, and I'm guessing my teacher didn't either. But all I know is that I was already, at that young age, a fan of the character. And I've tried to determine why. I'm sure at that point I was not doing a great job of following the storylines. My parents obviously liked the show, hence why we were watching it as a family, but neither of them were big readers of Agatha Christie. I'm not sure there was even a single one of her books around the house. So I think what it came down to is David Suchet and the music. I have always adored that theme song, but I'll talk about that more later. But with David Suchet, you had this interesting, funny, immaculately attired character, and for some reason he appealed to me. He had this distinctive little mustache, that quick, careful walk, and I loved it. I'm pretty certain it was also him and this show that led to my lifelong love of bowler hats, even though in retrospect he doesn't wear that many bowlers. I will admit that I commandeered a small blue Tupperware container that vaguely resembled such a hat from the kitchen, and along with some curled mustaches cut from black construction paper, took to dressing up as the character. I'm pretty sure there are still photos that exist of me striking his iconic pose from the end of the opening title sequence. My fandom did, and continues to, run pretty deep. Long before DVDs were a widespread thing, we had a fair number of the episodes recorded on VHS, and we watched those enough for me to feel pretty familiar with the world and character of Hercule Poirot. But keep in mind, I had yet to read a single one of the stories or novels upon which this was all based. But that all changed one day when I was in grade 6. I had won some sort of contest at the school, and as part of the prize, I could choose one book from a selection that the library had. And I settled on this exact one, Three Blind Mice and Other Stories by Agatha Christie. Obviously I knew her name, I'd seen it written in enough credit sequences, but what stood out to me was this silhouetted figure depicted on the cover. Here was a bow tie wearing, bowler hatted man with a walking stick, and just below his feet these words, featuring Hercule Poirot. And I thought, let's give this a try. And I thought it was amazing. Reading Three Blind Mice, or The Mousetrap as it's also called, reading that for the first time was unlike anything I'd read before. The suspense, the whole writing style. I especially remember reading the one scene where a character is strangled. It was kind of frightening, it had me on edge. This book was likely the beginning of graduating to reading books that were written for adults. I continued reading, I knew there were a few Miss Marple stories that follow, but then I got to the story entitled The Third Floor Flat. And I remember realizing that it was a Poirot story. And when he began to speak, I could hear David Suchet's voice saying the lines. I could picture his flat from the series. Even though I don't remember the story itself right at this moment, a good sign I should reread this book, I can't forget the feeling of excitement that I had when this show that I had come to love was merging with a whole world of books that I was just beginning to discover. I quickly began collecting everything I could find written by Agatha Christie, and the rest is history. But I promised a review was coming, and I think we should start that now. Now, as I've been going on about this show, you'd probably think that I've seen the whole series, maybe multiple times. But I haven't. I'm pretty sure I've seen all of what I'll call the classic episodes, likely out of order over the years, and around a certain point, and you fans will know what I mean, things changed, and not necessarily for the better. I'll probably talk about all of that in a different video, but the atmosphere and sense of fun that pervaded throughout the first 8 seasons, let's say, disappeared. And with it, so did my drive to continue watching. I do intend to go back through the whole series, and I mean the whole series right to the end, but as a first review, I wanted to pick an episode that stood out to me from the rest. So I chose the one that I've likely seen the most times. It was something of a Christmas tradition for a handful of years, the one that kicked off Season 6, Hercule Poirot's Christmas. The episode originally aired in 1994, and follows Poirot as he investigates the murder of Simeon Lee, a wealthy old man who has just finished giving each of his children an excellent motive for murder after declaring his intentions of writing a new will. I think it is a perfect example of why this series is great and highlights most of the elements that brought it such a large, loyal fan base. I say most of because notably, Captain Hastings and Miss Lemon do not make appearances. They aren't in the book either, and frankly neither is Japp, but I'm very glad they worked him in. I'll have to talk about Hugh Fraser and Pauline Moran at a later date. It's a fairly faithful adaptation of the book, with some differences, and we'll get to a few of them, but otherwise it sticks to the general outline of the story pretty well. As for the novel itself, Murder for Christmas, A Holiday for Murder, whatever name you want to call it, I really enjoy it. I think Agatha Christie writes all of the characters extremely well, in particular all of the Lee brothers and their wives, with all their varying personalities. All of the character introductions are excellent, and I think the story is really great. There are a couple of issues I have with it, but again I'll talk about those in a bit. But before the story begins, we get the opening credits sequence in full. I know it faded away over the years, but here we get it in all its glory. The theme song for Poirot, written by Christopher Gunning, is one of the greatest pairings between a piece of music and a television series ever, in my opinion. They are completely inseparable. If you hear it, you picture that opening. If you see David Suchet just walking away as a scene ends, your mind would just fill in the music, I'm guessing, even if the TV was muted. That song, with the saxophone melody, the piano starting things off, it's perfect and completely evokes everything that this show is at its best. There's an air of mystery, little touches in the theme that are the musical equivalent to the twinkle in David Suchet's eye, with a hint of foreboding worked in. And the visuals that go along with it. Art Deco fonts and artwork, the train rushing by, kaleidoscopic imagery with the shapes shimmering around Poirot's face, and every time we see him, he's got this little smile. Even as the song becomes louder and more driving, as if we're careening towards danger, Poirot smiles at us as if he's saying, "I have everything under control, mon ami." And that final shot of him walking away, then stopping to tip his hat. The designers of that opening knew exactly what they were doing. But then the movie begins. I'll just call it a movie, even if it is a feature-length episode. It begins with the first deviation from the source material, a flashback to Africa in 1896. I don't mind this change at all because it plays into something that the rest of the opening act also strives for, making Simeon Lee even more despicable than he was in the book. This flashback even goes so far as to make him a killer right off the bat. And in it, we meet a new character for the film, Stella, who becomes quite important later on. But once we jump ahead to 1936, we meet up with Poirot and Chief Inspector Japp. This is another change, but again, a welcome one as far as I'm concerned. Poirot only shows up in the book quite a ways in, and I say the more Poirot the better, especially on screen. And now it's time for me to heap praise upon David Suchet. You knew this was coming. He is, and always will be, the definitive Poirot to me. I realize that I was introduced to the character a little backwards, meeting the TV version first, but he embodies the role in a way that no other actor has. If you watched my channel before, you know I really enjoy the Peter Ustinov series too, but David Suchet is Poirot. Before anyone corrects me on the various ways he played the character differently than the literary original, I understand. There are times in the books where Poirot says and does things that I can't picture the David Suchet version doing in a million years. Take, for example, the scene in the book where Poirot lets out a eardrum-piercing scream from the murder scene to test where a scream can be heard in the house. That would never happen in this TV series. It just wouldn't. And if it did, I think we would all be a little shocked. That's a small difference. But what I appreciate more than anything about David Suchet's performance is how exact it is. He crafted a characterization that is so developed, so well-rounded and all-encompassing. David Suchet disappears into the role and plays every aspect to perfection. He can be pompous and arrogant as he speaks about his brilliance in the third person. He can be extremely serious and almost intimidating as he hones in on a lying suspect. He can be very charming to women, as he is with the character of Lydia at the end of this movie. The smile on her face as he flatters her is quite telling. He can be very annoying and over-fussy to the brusque, stiff upper lip British men he comes in contact with, and he can present the humorous side of Poirot so well. For instance, the facial expressions he can affect when observing a meal that is not up to his high standards, or the look of resigned disgust at having to spend Christmas with people that are insulting him right to his face. He shows us all sides of this character, and is probably the best Poirot we'll ever see. Philip Jackson's Chief Inspector Japp replaces Colonel Johnson from the novel as Poirot's police friend who begins working the case. The character of Colonel Johnson was also in Murder in Three Acts, and mentions that case in the book. But I'm completely fine with them shoehorning Japp into the story. You gotta fit in at least one other regular, right? Philip Jackson is dependably great as well. I love the scenes where you can feel the friendship between these two very different men, like their first scene together here. I always enjoy how Japp is portrayed, not making him look like a fool next to the master detective Poirot. Instead, he's a very capable, very by-the-book policeman, who would probably get to the solution eventually, just not as quick as his good friend. The one thing that is hard to understand is why Japp gets so impatient with Poirot as he slowly unravels the mystery and dramatically leads everyone to the solution at the end. Japp and Poirot have worked dozens of crimes together, if not more at this point, so you'd think Poirot's methods and very particular performances would be familiar to him, unless that's why he gets impatient. Who knows? Philip Jackson is also so adept at the comedic moments that he's given. The scene where we see his happy wife and in-laws singing Christmas carols together is wonderful. The camera slowly pans across this merry scene until it rests on Japp, sitting alone, his face set like a stone, observing this whole tableau, clearly not impressed. Vernon Dobchev plays Simeon Lee, and just visually, he's great casting. He and Scott Handy, who plays Simeon in the flashback, are a close match. He looks to be playing older than he was in real life, but with his lips drawn back, his white hair, he fits the part of a decrepit, but not as decrepit as you first think, elderly man. His hunched back and wary eyes show us a man that has been withered by greed and a vengeful spirit. Simeon Lee is presented as being slightly more lecherous than he was in the book, again, really making him as villainous as possible, and his performance is quite good up until the scene where he assembles the family to tell them about his new will. His performance becomes quite heightened, to say the least, with his voice rising to almost a cackling yell, and it's a bit much. One major difference, though, is the fact that Simeon Lee invites Poirot to Gorston Hall himself, almost from the beginning. The scene where that happens is brilliant. Poirot is very precisely assembling a gourmet meal for himself before realizing that his radiator is no longer working, and it won't be fixed until after Christmas, forecasting a chilly Christmas day for our favorite Belgian. But Simeon Lee rides to the rescue with his invitation, and Poirot accepts after asking the one crucial question: does your house have the central heating? I love it. For the rest of the characters, there are some missing from the book. Maybe most noticeably, the one son, David, and his wife, Hilda, don't appear at all. Although, the characters of David and Alfred are somewhat combined into one, with Alfred now being the loyal son that still lives with his father, but also being a sensitive artist of sorts. We're introduced to him painting, and a subplot that is mostly dropped from the movie, we get a hint of when Alfred is given the outburst at Simeon after Simeon insults the boy's mother. Alfred is played by Simon Roberts, and overall doesn't have a lot to do, but does a good job with what he's given. Catherine Rabbit plays Alfred's wife, Lydia, and she's really great. Just in comparison to the character from the book, she's perfect and brings a balance of determination and tenderness to the role. Eric Cart and Andrea Bernard, I hope I'm saying that right, play George and Magdalene, and again, both do very well. Brian Guaspari plays the black sheep, Harry. He gives Harry the appropriate swagger and cockiness that he needs. Sasha Behar plays Pilar Estravados, and upon watching the movie this time, I wasn't sure how I felt about her character at first. She seemed so overconfident, almost abrasively superior, and that wasn't really how I read her character. She gave her inflections that I didn't really hear when reading, but I think are there in the novel. And when it comes to the point where she has a change of heart, the way she plays that shift was really well handled, so I was quite impressed in the end. Mark Tandy as Superintendent Sugden is very good, making him almost unreadable at times, trying to come across as assured, but also wanting to be accommodating in front of a Scotland Yard bigwig like Japp, and of course in front of the renowned Hercule Poirot, and veteran British character actor John Horsley does very well as the butler Tressilian. He reminded me very much of Anthony Hopkins here, so that was fun. One other character missing is Stephen Farr, and while it's too bad he doesn't appear, I will say that I'm not a fan of the scene in the book where some revelations come to light about both he and Pilar. The number of coincidences that begin to pile up in that scene are almost comical to me, so I'm very okay with that being excised from the movie. So the changes that were made achieve what they needed to, condensing many scenes and eliminating some completely in order to make this story fit into roughly an hour and 40 minutes. It moves at a rapid pace, but that works. There is literally not a dull moment. Even still though, there are whole sections of dialogue, it seemed to me at least, that are lifted verbatim from the book. The novel is very dialogue driven, and if anything, Poirot is focused on less than normal. So I appreciated the addition of moments in the film where Poirot is shown just thinking and putting the pieces together. David Suchet is a great listener on screen. It's all very subtle, but just the changes in his face as little things become clear to him, or his furrowed brow as the various facts are so clearly swirling around in his head, give him chances to display an aspect of Hercule Poirot that appears so frequently in the books. The act of sitting quietly and thinking. And while here he maybe does more so slowly pacing and thinking, it achieves the same effect. We get an excellent assemble the suspects and explain everything scene, and David Suchet always just nails those. The whole tone of his voice changes, becoming low and methodical, as he's laying out every person's means, motive, and opportunity. He controls the whole situation, like an orchestra conductor, and everyone else just has to come along for the ride. The movie ends on a wonderful comedic beat where Poirot and Japp are exchanging their Christmas gifts. I won't explain the whole scene, but Poirot gets the line, "Oh no, these must be kept for best." I've managed to work that line into many situations over the years in real life, so thankfully my family knows what I'm talking about. I love the score in this episode. There's a festive version, for lack of a better word, of the Poirot theme, and it's used pretty frequently, but the best part is the various iterations of God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen that are employed in different ways. I believe the first time is a low, ominous version that plays as we're meeting the elderly Simeon Lee for the first time, but throughout we get many different usages of it, each unique and affect the mood of a scene in different ways, but always sounding unmistakably Christmassy. As is usual for this show, it looks great. The set decoration is always full of detail and authenticity, and the locations this time around are amazing. But it's even things like the color temperature, giving scenes based on their location different atmosphere. Gorston Hall just looks and feels cold and drafty, but then the village inn and pub are close and warm looking. There's also the brief scene in Wales where the Japp family Christmas gathering is taking place. That street is filmed beautifully, and the shot of Poirot walking down between the houses is a nice echo of the familiar shot from the opening. Let's talk about the violence of this story. Notably, the book is dedicated to Agatha Christie's brother-in-law, who apparently was a faithful reader and had requested a more aggressive murder for a change, rather than the usual, more humane poisons and the like. So she obliged, making the crime scene a blood-splattered throat-cutting. The movie understandably sanitizes that. I'm not sure we see any blood at the site of the murder, but one thing they do change is having the murderer physically attack Pilar later on. That is an improvement. The scene in the book involves balancing a stone cannonball above a door, like a Home Alone booby trap. But here, the killer attacks Pilar with a war club of some kind. The scene where that is reenacted as Poirot explains everything is very well shot, with the killer's shadow on the wall and an African mask that's hanging there lined up perfectly where the shadow's head should be. It makes the murderer look even more monstrous and is a nice stylistic touch. Hercule Poirot's Christmas is a fantastic installment in an iconic series. If you're already a fan, you know why I appreciate this so much, and if you're not, give this one a try. It doesn't even have to be the Christmas season. I think it will play well at any time of year. Highly, highly recommended. Thanks very much for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, please visit my channel and check out some more of my reviews. In the meantime, I'll try and settle on which of David Suchet's 69 other Poirot episodes I'd like to cover next. Merry Christmas and adios for now.